HOA Karen threw my disabled daughter into a burning fire pit just for being in her yard. It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon in the suburban oasis they called home. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the family's backyard. The scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the air as the father leaned back in his chair, taking in the tranquility of the moment. His daughter, sitting in her wheelchair, smiled up at him as they enjoyed the calm of their little world. For a moment, everything felt perfect, safe, serene, and unbreakable. They were home, together, and the outside world seemed so far away. But just beyond their garden, in a house that had always seemed like part of the neighborhood's fabric, there was a lurking threat. Karen, the notorious HOA enforcer, always watching, always plotting. From her window, she had seen the family laughing, living their lives, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. For weeks, she'd been seething, quietly plotting a way to impose her twisted sense of control over the peaceful home. Today, she decided would be the day. The door to her house slammed open, and Karen, as usual, stormed onto the yard with her usual air of authority and entitlement. She was quick to approach, her eyes narrowing as she fixed her gaze on the daughter. "You're not supposed to be out here," she snapped, her voice sharp as a whip. "This is against HOA rules. You're breaking the law just by existing in your own yard." The father, still in his chair, felt the jolt of disbelief hit him like a punch to the stomach. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to do anything to defuse this madness, but Karen was already escalating. The words came faster now, with no room for reason, no room for humanity. Karen's demands grew more absurd, her anger more intense. The father's heart pounded as he tried to reason with her, his protective instincts kicking in. He could feel his daughter's fear growing, her body stiffening in her chair as the woman loomed over her. The air around them seemed to crackle with tension, and everything the father loved about his home, the peace, the sanctuary, began to unravel before his eyes. And then, in a moment of pure, unhinged fury, Karen crossed a line that no one could have anticipated. With a violent, calculated motion, she grabbed his daughter and hurled her into the fire pit that had been left burning, the flames licking the air with an insatiable hunger. Time seemed to stop. The father's scream pierced the air as he rushed forward, but the damage was already done. His daughter was already in the fire. The sun was setting in the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting a soft amber glow across the neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. It was the kind of place where families raised children, neighbors exchanged pleasantries, and life moved at a pace that allowed everyone to breathe easy. In the backyard of one such home, a father and his daughter sat together, a picture of calm amidst the typical suburban hustle. For Michael, this was his sanctuary, the only place where he could truly relax after a long day at work. His daughter, Lily, sat beside him in her wheelchair, her face illuminated by the fading sunlight. At 10 years old, Lily had been born with cerebral palsy, which affected her mobility and coordination. Yet her spirit was untouched. Her bright green eyes shone with curiosity and mischief, and her smile, radiant as it was enough to light up any room she entered. Despite the daily challenges she faced, Lily was as close to perfect as any child could be. She had an infectious laugh, a sharp wit, and a heart that was bigger than any of her physical limitations. Michael had always been her biggest supporter. Being her father meant more than just taking care of her. It meant being her protector, her advocate, and her unwavering source of love. They shared a bond deeper than words could express. It was in the small moments, when Michael would gently brush a lock of hair from her face, or when they would laugh together at a silly joke she made, that he realized how much she depended on him. And it was those moments, those ordinary, quiet moments, that he treasured most. But life was never as simple as it seemed. Michael had always done his best to shield Lily from the cruelty that lurked in the world, but it wasn't always possible. The neighborhood they lived in had its share of challenges. The Homeowners Association, HOA, a seemingly benign group that was supposed to keep the community well-kept and orderly, had become a source of constant stress. And at the center of that stress was Karen. Karen was the HOA enforcer, the self-appointed sheriff of the neighborhood. She was a woman in her late 40s with a rigid, authoritarian personality that seemed to thrive on control. Every time she spoke, it felt like a command, a decree, and she made it clear that she was in charge. Her presence had been a constant irritation for Michael and his family as she routinely overstepped her boundaries, imposing her own interpretation of the HOA rules on everyone. From excessive fines for trivial infractions to unsolicited suggestions about how to maintain their lawn, Karen had a way of making life miserable for anyone who didn't live up to her standards. For Michael, it had started with small disagreements. First, it was the color of the house paint. Then, the size of their backyard shed. He could still remember the heated arguments he had with her, how she had shown up uninvited to inspect their property, waving the HOA manual like a badge of honor. But it was never just about rules. It was about power. Karen didn't just want to enforce the rules, she wanted to rule the neighborhood. And in her eyes, no one, especially not a disabled child, was exempt from her scrutiny. The conflict between Karen and Michael had reached a boiling point over the past few months. The issue? A small garden Lily had planted in the yard. A simple, innocent project meant to give her something to care for, something to nurture. Yet, Karen saw it as a violation of HOA rules. No decorative plants allowed in the front yard, she had stated, her voice dripping with authority when she spotted the flowers. And despite Michael's attempts to explain that it was a personal project for his daughter, something that helped her feel independent, Karen refused to back down. She threatened fines, and when that didn't work, she resorted to even more aggressive tactics, leaving nasty notes on the door, making unfounded complaints about the family's noncompliance, and even making rude remarks about Lily's disability. To the outside world, it might have seemed trivial, just a neighborhood squabble over flowers and rules, but to Michael, it felt like an attack on everything he held dear. He could feel the weight of Karen's actions taking a toll on his family, on Lily. It was one thing to face challenges in the world because of her disability, but it was another thing entirely to have someone like Karen single her out for something as innocent as a garden. As the tension escalated, Michael found himself grappling with a sense of helplessness. He had always believed in following the rules, in doing what was right. He had tried to reason with Karen, even taken his concerns to the HOA board. But it was clear that Karen was beyond reason. Her recent behavior was becoming more erratic, her actions more dangerous. Michael had started to fear that this wasn't just about property rules anymore. It was personal, and it seemed like Karen was determined to destroy everything his family had worked for. That evening, as Michael sat beside Lily in the backyard, his thoughts turned to the chaos that seemed to be closing in around them. He had always prided himself on being able to protect his family from harm, but in this moment, he wasn't sure how much longer he could shield them from Karen's wrath. The small, peaceful world they had built was crumbling, and with every day that passed, the storm that Karen had set in motion seemed to grow stronger. In the distance, Michael could see Karen's house. The lights were on, and he could almost feel her eyes on them, watching, waiting. He knew that this was no longer just about a garden, about flowers or rules. It was about power, and it was about time someone stood up to her. Little did he know that moment would come sooner than he expected, and it would come in the form of a brutal, unforgivable act that would change their lives forever. The calm before the storm was over. The real battle was about to begin. The stillness of the evening had been shattered, and what was once a peaceful neighborhood now felt like a battlefield. The tension in the air was palpable, as though everything, the flowers, the garden, even the small gestures of kindness between neighbors, had been twisted into a battleground for control. Michael, sitting next to Lily in their backyard, could feel his heart racing. The usual comforting hum of the neighborhood had been replaced by a quiet unease. He glanced at Lily, her bright eyes gazing up at him with unspoken trust, as if she could sense the impending storm too. That evening, as the soft breeze ruffled the leaves of the trees, there was an unmistakable sound. The crunch of gravel underfoot, followed by the unmistakable screech of the gate. Michael didn't have to look up to know who it was. It was Karen, the woman who had become a constant thorn in their side, a woman whose bitterness seemed to overflow with every breath she took. She was walking toward them with purpose, her face set in that familiar stern expression. There was no casual greeting, no attempt to make small talk, just the cold, hard glare that could freeze anyone in their path. Michael stood up, his protective instincts kicking in as he felt his heart tighten with anxiety. Michael, Karen's voice cut through the air like a blade. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. We need to talk about this garden. It's a violation of HOA rules, and I won't stand for it any longer. Michael braced himself. He had been expecting this. The simmering tension from weeks of passive-aggressive notes, rude comments, and confrontations had finally come to a head. He didn't want to engage with her, but he also knew that this wasn't something he could walk away from. Not anymore. Karen, Michael said, trying to keep his voice calm, though the anger bubbling inside him made it hard to keep his words steady. Lily planted those flowers because they make her happy. She's been through so much, and this garden is her way of finding some peace. I'm not asking for special treatment, just some understanding. Karen's face twisted in disdain. Understanding? You think I care about understanding? This is about rules, Michael. About keeping this neighborhood in line. You've broken the rules, and now there will be consequences. Your daughter is a liability. She's already a burden, and now you're making it worse. Michael's blood ran cold. He knew she didn't mean the garden. She wasn't talking about the flowers. She was talking about Lily. She was talking about his daughter. In that moment, Michael realized just how far Karen was willing to go to assert her control. His daughter, his beautiful, innocent daughter, was nothing more than an object to her, a nuisance to be eliminated, a rule breaker to be punished. Karen, Michael said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury, you can't keep treating us like this. This isn't about the HOA, it's about you bullying a disabled child. The words hit her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. If anything, her expression hardened even more. You think I'm bullying her? I'm making sure that the neighborhood stays intact. And if that means keeping people like her in check, then so be it. She doesn't belong out here, Michael. You're just too soft to see it. At this point, Lily, who had been silently watching the exchange, spoke up. Her voice, though small and weak, carried a strength that silenced both of them. I'm not a burden, she said softly but firmly, her words hanging in the air. I'm not a burden to anyone. I just wanted a place to grow something of my own. Karen's gaze flickered, but it wasn't out of guilt. It was a flicker of annoyance. Keep her inside, Michael, she snapped. That's where she belongs. I won't have her out here, making my job harder. Michael could feel his blood boil, but he kept his composure. The rage that boiled in his chest threatened to spill over, but he knew that this wasn't a battle to be won with anger. He needed to keep his cool for Lily. He needed to protect her, no matter the cost. But as Karen turned to walk away, there was something in her stance, in the way she held herself, that made Michael's gut twist with a deep, unsettling fear. This wasn't over. Karen was just getting started. The next few days passed in a haze of escalating tension. The peaceful calm they once enjoyed had been replaced with a constant, simmering anxiety. Michael had tried to keep things normal for Lily, distracting her with stories and games, but the shadow of Karen's threats loomed over them like a storm cloud. They couldn't ignore the fact that Karen was still watching, still plotting. The idea of having to constantly fight just to live peacefully in their own home gnawed at Michael's resolve. He felt like a lion in a cage, angry, desperate, and trapped. Then, one morning it happened. The sun had barely risen, and the yard was still covered in a light mist. Michael had just stepped outside to grab the newspaper when he saw her, Karen, walking across their yard with that same determined look on her face. But this time, she wasn't alone. She was flanked by two other neighbors, people who had been silent throughout the whole ordeal, but whose expressions now mirrored her own. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a mob, and Karen was the leader. Before Michael could react, Karen was already at the edge of the garden, her eyes fixed on Lily's flowers with a disturbing gleam in her eyes. "This ends today," she declared, her voice cold, final. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He knew what was coming, but he wasn't prepared for how quickly it would happen. In one swift motion, Karen lunged forward, grabbing the flowers and yanking them from the ground, tossing them aside as if they were nothing more than weeds. The neighbor stood by, watching but saying nothing. "No!" Michael shouted, running toward them. But it was too late. Karen had already ripped through the small sanctuary Lily had created. And in that moment, the world shifted. This was no longer just about flowers or rules. This was about something far more dangerous. This was about control, about power, and about what lengths people were willing to go to in order to take it from someone else. But Michael wasn't going to let it happen. Not without a fight. The air was thick with tension as Michael stood there, his fists clenched, watching Karen tear through his daughter's garden. He had always prided himself on being a calm, rational man, but something had snapped inside him. This was no longer a battle over rules or property, it was a fight for his family, for his daughter's dignity. "Stop!" Michael yelled, his voice hoarse with emotion, but Karen didn't even flinch. The flowers, the bright, innocent creations Lily had nurtured with her own hands, were now nothing more than a mess of broken stems and torn petals. Each tug, each violent motion was like a stab to Michael's heart. The one thing that had brought his daughter joy, that had allowed her to express herself, was being destroyed right before his eyes. Lily, who had been watching in silence, finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "Please stop," she whispered, her words barely audible, but full of vulnerability and pain. She looked at her father, her face contorted in confusion and fear. She couldn't understand why someone would do this to her, why someone would hate her so much. Michael's heart shattered at the sight of his daughter, her innocent face filled with disbelief. He could feel the rage boiling inside him, rising up like a tidal wave, but he pushed it down, not wanting to scare Lily. He had to stay calm. He had to protect her. But then Karen turned, a cruel smile spreading across her face as she saw the father's reaction. "You should have known better, Michael," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Your daughter doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong in this neighborhood, and you're just too soft to see it." The words hit like a slap, the sting of them making Michael's blood boil. He had been trying to protect his family, to keep them safe, but here was Karen, unrelenting, trying to tear everything apart with her cruel words and actions. He couldn't let this go on anymore. In a surge of anger, Michael rushed forward, his steps quick and determined. He wasn't going to let Karen walk away, unchallenged. Not this time. Leave her alone. Michael shouted as he approached, his voice shaking with rage. "You don't get to tell us where we belong. You don't get to decide who stays and who goes. This is our home, and we'll defend it." Karen turned to face him, unfazed by his outburst. Her cold eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, without warning, she took a step forward, her hands reaching for the garden hose lying nearby. She lifted it, aiming the nozzle at Lily, and turned the water on full blast. Lily cried out, the cold water hitting her with force, drenching her completely. She struggled to move, but the water made it harder for her to sit up in her wheelchair. Michael's heart lurched in his chest as he watched his daughter shiver, unable to escape the cold, powerful stream of water that Karen was directing at her. It was as if Karen enjoyed the control she had over their lives, as if the pain she was inflicting was giving her the satisfaction she craved. "Enough!" Michael shouted, his voice breaking through the roar of the water. He stormed toward Karen, his body trembling with fury. He wasn't thinking about the consequences anymore. He wasn't thinking about the law or the HOA. All he could think about was Lily and how much he needed to protect her from the cruelty of the world. As he reached her, he grabbed the hose from her hands, ripping it away with all his strength. Karen staggered back, surprised by his forceful reaction. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of fear in her eyes, but it quickly faded, replaced by a smirk. "You think you can stop me?" she sneered. "This is my neighborhood. I make the rules." "You don't make the rules," Michael growled, throwing the hose aside. You've crossed the line this time." Just as he spoke those words, Karen's face contorted with rage, and in an instant she lunged at him, her hands reaching for his throat. But Michael was ready. He stepped back quickly, avoiding her grip, and in the next moment he shoved her hard. Karen stumbled back, falling to the ground with a thud, the shock of the fall briefly stunning her. For a moment, everything was still. Michael stood there, panting heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. What had just happened? Had he really just pushed her? It was like the floodgates of everything he had been holding back had burst open all at once. Karen slowly got to her feet, her eyes burning with fury. Her body trembled with anger, but there was something else in her eyes too, fear. For the first time in all these months, she was afraid. "You'll pay for this," Karen spat, wiping the dirt from her clothes. "You think I won't have you thrown out of here? I'll make sure you never see another peaceful day in this neighborhood again. You won't win, Michael. You're nothing but a soft man trying to protect a useless child." But Michael stood tall, his fists still clenched at his sides. The weight of Karen's words was nothing compared to the love he felt for his daughter, and he knew in that moment that no matter what happened next, he would never let her tear them apart. "I'm not going anywhere," Michael said firmly, his voice unwavering. "And neither is Lily. This is our home, and you'll never take it from us." Karen's eyes flickered with doubt, but she didn't back down. Instead, she turned on her heel, walking away in a huff, her footsteps heavy with frustration. The neighbors, who had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, remained in the background, unsure of how to respond. Michael turned to Lily, his heart breaking as he saw the look of fear and confusion on her face. She was drenched, shivering, and trembling from the ordeal. He quickly wheeled her inside, trying to comfort her as best as he could, though his own heart was heavy with worry. As they entered the house, Michael locked the door behind them, his mind racing. What had just happened? What was Karen capable of? And how far was she willing to go to destroy their peace? He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But one thing was certain, he would fight for his daughter. He would fight for his family, no matter the cost. The house was silent now, save for the distant hum of traffic outside. Michael sat on the couch, his hands gripping the arms of it tightly, as if trying to hold himself together. Lily sat beside him, her body still shivering from the shock of the water, but her eyes no longer had the same innocence they once did. The fear in her gaze was palpable, and Michael could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He had done everything in his power to protect her, yet here they were, scarred by the actions of someone who should never have had the power to harm them. "Why would she do that, Daddy?" Lily's voice broke through the silence, soft and full of confusion. "Why did she hurt me?" Michael's heart twisted, and he wrapped an arm around her. "I don't know, sweetie, but I promise you, we're not going to let her hurt you again. Not now, not ever." Lily leaned into his side, and he held her tightly, as if the simple act of holding her would somehow erase the pain she had just experienced. He had to stay strong. He had to protect her, no matter what it took. For the first time since the confrontation, Michael allowed himself to take a deep breath. He could feel the tension beginning to ease in his shoulders, but there was still a gnawing fear in his gut. This wasn't over. Karen wouldn't just back down after today. Her thirst for control was far too strong, and Michael knew she would find a way to come after them again, perhaps in even more dangerous ways. But Michael wasn't the same man he had been before. He had let her push him around, let her attack his family in subtle ways, but now that would end. He would fight for his family, not just physically, but legally and emotionally. He wasn't just going to stand by and let her tear apart everything he had built for them. The first thing he did was pull out his phone, searching for local attorneys who could help with the case against Karen. He didn't know exactly what charges could be brought against her. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was determined to find out. What she had done today was unforgivable, and the idea that she could continue to harm them without facing any consequences was too much to bear. Before he could make any calls, there was a knock at the door. It was soft at first, hesitant, Michael's body stiffened. He knew who it was without even needing to look through the peephole. Karen, or perhaps one of her supporters, had come to make things worse. But he wasn't going to back down now. He wasn't going to hide. He had nothing to fear from her. He opened the door to find two police officers standing on the porch, their expression serious but not unfriendly. Michael's chest tightened. He hadn't called the police. He hadn't had time to. So, why were they here? "Are you Michael Harper?" One of the officers asked, his tone professional but gentle. "We've received a report of an incident involving you and a Karen Collins in which there was some physical altercation and possible assault." Michael's mind raced. Karen had beaten him to it. She had already filed a report, perhaps spinning the story to make herself the victim. He had no idea what she had said, but he knew she was capable of anything. "I am," Michael said, keeping his voice steady, "but what she reported is completely false. She attacked my daughter, and I was only defending her." The officers exchanged a glance. "We understand," the second officer said. "We just need to take a statement from you and from your neighbors just to get all the facts straight. We're not here to cause trouble, but we have to investigate every report thoroughly." Michael nodded, knowing that there was no way around this. "Of course. I'll tell you everything that happened." The officers entered the house, and Michael led them into the living room, where they took a seat. Lily, still wrapped in a blanket, sat quietly on the couch, her face tired but determined. She had seen so much in the past few hours, more than any child should ever have to witness. Michael could see the worry in her eyes, but there was also something else, a strength that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just his little girl anymore. She was his partner in this fight, and she would stand by him as they faced whatever came next. The officers took their statements, carefully noting down every detail. They asked about the confrontation, about Karen's actions, and about Michael's response. Michael explained, word for word, what had happened: the water, the garden, the threats, the confrontation. He recounted the moments of physical violence and how he had done everything he could to protect Lily. He didn't hold back. He wanted to make sure they understood the severity of Karen's actions. After they had finished, the officers told him they would be in touch. "We'll follow up with your neighbors and gather more information," the first officer said. "If there's enough evidence, we may pursue charges against Ms. Collins. But right now, we just want to make sure you're safe." Michael nodded, but the fear in his chest didn't completely disappear. The police would do their part, but Karen's power was far-reaching. She had made enemies before, and this was only going to escalate. There was no telling what lengths she would go to now that she knew Michael and his family wouldn't back down. The next few days were a blur of activity. Michael stayed close to Lily, making sure she felt safe and secure. He didn't want her to be afraid, but he knew that she couldn't escape the reality of what had happened. They were in a war, and the fight was far from over. On the outside, everything seemed calm. The neighborhood continued to move at its usual pace, people going about their daily routines, but Michael could feel the undercurrent of unease. Karen was still out there, and there was no telling what she would do next. It wasn't just about the garden anymore. It wasn't just about the flowers or the HOA rules. This had become personal. Karen had attacked his family, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. And he would fight. He would fight until his last breath to make sure that Lily, his precious daughter, was safe. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the neighborhood grew tense. Michael stayed vigilant, constantly aware of Karen's unpredictable behavior. He had spoken to his lawyer, filed a formal complaint, and gathered all the evidence he could. But even as the wheels of justice began to turn, there was a persistent sense of unease that refused to leave. This wasn't just a fight for legal rights. It had become a battle for dignity and safety. Karen's actions were now more than just a personal vendetta. They were an attack on everything Michael had worked so hard to protect. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The more Michael fought, the more people began to take notice. Neighbors who had previously stayed silent were now stepping forward, sharing their own experiences with Karen's oppressive tactics. They had seen her push people around, harass families, and manipulate the HOA rules for her own benefit. The more voices that joined his, the stronger Michael felt. He wasn't alone in this fight. And then, the moment he had been dreading finally arrived, the official hearing. Michael had prepared himself and Lily for what was about to come. They both had to face Karen in the community hall, surrounded by other neighbors, members of the HOA board, and the authorities. This was the final showdown, the moment of truth. As the hearing began, Karen entered the room, her usual smug expression in place. She had always been the one to command attention, but now, Michael noticed something different about her. She wasn't as confident as before. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a recognition that the community was turning against her, that the people who had once supported her were now questioning her motives. Michael stood tall, his back straight, his words calm but resolute as he presented his case. He recounted every detail of what had transpired, the assault on Lily, the destruction of their garden, and the subsequent harassment. He didn't let any of the emotions he had been carrying break through. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. It was about making sure that someone like Karen could never harm another family like she had harmed his. The board listened carefully, and the neighbors who had spoken out against Karen's behavior provided their testimonies. It became clear to everyone in that room that Karen was no longer just an overbearing HOA enforcer. She was a bully, someone who had abused her power for far too long, and Michael wasn't going to let her get away with it. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she tried to defend herself with the same tired excuses, claiming she was only trying to enforce the rules, that everything she did was for the greater good. But her voice wavered, and for the first time, Michael could see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't the untouchable authority figure she had once thought herself to be. She was just a woman clinging to power, a woman who had overestimated her control. In the end, the board ruled in Michael's favor. They unanimously agreed that Karen's actions had violated community standards, and they removed her from her position as HOA enforcer. The community had spoken. The family had won. But it wasn't just the legal victory that Michael was proud of. It was the way his daughter had shown resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty. As they left the meeting, Michael held Lily's hand tightly. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had been through so much, but now she was free from the fear that had once plagued her every day. The weight that had hung over their lives for so long had finally lifted, and while the scars would remain, they had come through it stronger than ever. "You did it, Daddy," Lily whispered, her voice small but filled with pride. "We did it." Michael smiled, tears welling in his eyes. He had fought for his daughter. He had fought for his family. And in the end, they had triumphed. They may have lost their garden, their sense of peace, and their trust in some of the people around them. But they had gained something far more important: their dignity, their safety, and the knowledge that they could face whatever came next together. As they walked back home, Michael glanced around at the quiet, peaceful neighborhood. It was still the same, but it had changed. He had changed, and in that moment, he realized that no matter how hard the world tried to tear them apart, they would always stand strong. They would always have each other, and they would always fight for what was right. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. The journey Michael and his daughter had been through was not just a story of survival. It was a call to action for anyone who's ever felt helpless in the face of injustice. For anyone who's ever been bullied, mistreated, or ignored, this story serves as a reminder that you do not have to stand alone. If you believe in standing up for what's right, if you believe in protecting those who can't protect themselves, it's time to take a stand. Share this story with your friends, your family, your community. Let it be a reminder that power doesn't belong to the few. It belongs to all of us, especially when we unite and fight for justice. Whether it's speaking up against bullies in your community, helping a friend through tough times, or standing up for your own rights, remember that every voice matters. Join us in the fight for fairness. Stand with families like Michael's and support those who need protection the most. Share your voice, take action, and let's ensure that no one ever has to face the same kind of cruelty again. Together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. Stand up. Speak out. Let's make a change.